Yeah, keep going.
Trying to act like we're talking.
I think Avatar.
I guess I can kind of believe it though. So dumb.
And so many great political movements started out as young people that wanted change. That's how the civil rights movement started. It's how the abolitionist movement started.
You just hear these stories and it just like really weighs on you, because considering like where they came from and how they like really started from the bottom, it's just something that everybody can do.
I think a lot of people think you need money and you need like all this time, you know, this power to do things, and you really like don't need any of that.
Rosie Head grew up as a sharecropper in a family of 9 children, and her entire family worked cutting and picking cotton, but her family was kept in debt, so she grew up in a very poor family.
In the segregated South in Jim Crow, Mississippi, only 6% of African Americans were registered to vote.
She began to be involved in the civil rights movement at the age of 17. This was in the 60s.
Back then, you had to be 21 to vote.
So the 17-year-old girl was teaching 21 and up-year-olds how to register to vote and to go out and vote. They were so intimidated by the KKK and even police officers that they wouldn't go out and vote.
And even as a teenager, she really believed in this cause and she really fought for it.
She would host mock elections in places like barbershops and beauty shops and really get people used to the idea of voting and how to best do it.
People were trying to intimidate her the whole time. There were KKK members standing over her shoulder and trying to scare her. It just doesn't seem to work. She just kind of keeps on at this daily work of convincing people to vote.
She had to fight against intimidators who were trying to stop her community from using their political voice.
It really just shows that she had that passion and she knew what she had to do and she knew it was right and she fought for it no matter what the consequences would be.
Through Rosie Head's efforts, thousands of African Americans learned to register to vote and how to vote. And this eventually culminated with the first election of an African American to statewide office since Reconstruction.
So José grew up in Texas, again in a working class family, and at the age of 15, he started getting interested in politics.
He was on the school's debate team, and so competing for a school, he had passion.
When he heard about JFK and he heard about other big-name politicians who wanted to get the Latino vote, José felt like they weren't doing enough to represent him.
He starts organizing voter drives and giving speeches, and he starts trying to raise money. He sells tamales door to door to get enough money to get people on the ballot.
He moved into the Chicano American Liberation Movement, starting a lot of advocacy efforts and events that tried to get his people involved and proud of their heritage and of their language.
He was trying to get them to vote for people who would really represent them.
He talked to people in his community and he organized and he rallied and he wanted people's voices to be heard. Rosie was really interesting because she knew what her community wanted. She understood like their fears and like their needs, even though she was just a teenager.
And like the fact that she had that sort of heart, knowing how she grew up, like we know that she grew up as a sharecropper in a family of 9 kids. And I remember growing up, my grandfather would tell me stories of him growing up as a sharecropper and how like he didn't get his first pair of shoes until he was 11 years old.
I think a lot of people think of politics as like the super serious and important thing. And I think they recognize that politics has to be something that's normal to people, something that's in their daily lives. I mean, Rosie Head would cook grits for people that she wants to convince to register to vote.
Right, and that goes into like trying to humanize it as much as possible.
José really like convinced people that, you know, young people and like poor people and Latino people, they can make a difference too.
I think that young people today, we like let ourselves fall into a place that's too comfortable. And I feel like something that Rosie Head and José had really in common was that they weren't comfortable with where they were and they wanted things to change.
No one is truly complacent. I think everyone wants some part of their life or some part of like our country to change. But but they don't know what they can do. My parents, like, they immigrated here when they were like in their 20s. And so, like, to be honest, they watch like Pakistan's politics and not America's. And so when it comes time to vote, they're like, Myra, who should we vote for? So basically, like, I get on the internet and I research everything and I tell them, like, hey, like, I think you should vote for these people. They do care because they know this stuff affects them, but they just need to be informed.
I feel like when somebody gets the ball rolling, it just keeps rolling.
Yeah.
And more people start getting involved.
Right. One voter talking to another voter, it just all adds up. That's how you can change an election.